All right, I got another article here. This one is actually the one that Ty just mentioned here. It's from Accounting Today, and it's in surprise, surprise, it's about COVID-19. But the title of the article is "Taking Stock of Your Firm: What Has Changed and What Will Change." And so this article is all about accounting firms, accounting and financial firms. And so one of the things they said is, of course, culture is everything is the first thing they say. And so they talk about like, a commitment to culture, revisiting your culture, making sure it's, the inclusive, fun place that wants to work. Remote is here to stay is the other one that they're talking about. And I think we could probably talk about this for a while, but I used to work in a firm that was not remote. Heard from people that are still working there that they had to make the switch to being remote in some capacity because of this, and they'll continue to be remote after it. It's something that they could have done a long time ago, but they were forced to do it. And so I think it reaffirms what we've been saying on this podcast for a while, that the pandemic is a great accelerator and remote work is one of those accelerations. And then it talks about business as a partnership, and it talks about kind of a proactive focus on the clients, the partnership between the clients and the firm itself. And they also talk about then, the staff and the partnership that happens there too. And so I just wanted to get it from you guys, if there's something that maybe missed, or if they're off base on any of these. I mean, I have a feeling we probably all agree, but I'd like to hear what you guys thought.
Yeah, I think the way I've been talking to a lot of other CPA firms, and for the audience members who don't know, AJ and Charlie and we were part of a firm called TCA that does CFO advisory work. So we don't do the traditional CPA firm work. So we network a lot and work hand in hand with other CPA firms who do the traditional work, the tax returns, the audits, the typical kind of CPA services. And so because of that, that's my lifeline. So I've been staying in touch as much as possible with CPA firms. And that's one of the questions that I've been asking each of these firms is, okay, when the state opens the offices back up, what are you going to do? What's your plan? Do you call everyone back into the office immediately, or how do you plan on handling that? And every single one, and I've asked this question the last week and a half to 4 or 5 firms, and every single one didn't know. They didn't know the answer. They kind of, I think the way they answered it, of not knowing, it seemed pretty clear that the idea of calling everyone back the day the government allows you to was not going to happen, that's not the page that they were on. But did this mean that they were going to have everyone working remotely indefinitely? Were they going to let people work remotely indefinitely? Or, in some cases, what I was hearing was they might leave it up to the people to decide kind of what worked best for them now that they've kind of figured out how they can actually do remote work. That's what they're looking at is kind of leaving that option open in some cases. In other cases, what I thought was an interesting strategy was having office days where people were supposed to come in on certain days, but otherwise would work from home. And I don't know, the part that I didn't quite follow about that strategy is if that had anything to do with social distancing, or if that simply was people like working at home now, but we still need them in the office to meet with each other occasionally, if that's what was driving that thought. But yeah, that's I guess I don't personally have a strong opinion on this. Our organization has been kind of work at home or work hand in hand at the client site from the beginning. So we don't have a centralized office for us anyway. So I don't have an opinion to levy on this other than just to report what I'm hearing from the firms that I've talked to.
I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and to follow up on what you said, I'm wondering if the response of those CPA firms based on they don't know is less about maybe like their feeling on it, but more against like worker revolt. If you just told everybody they got to be back Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, fight traffic to work at home, versus work at home, if you just wouldn't have not mutiny, but some really offset employees because they've, I was able to get my work done, but now I got to come back into the office,
Well, I can speak. I can give you my opinion on that piece in terms of what I feel about what our government has done. And I try not to get too political most of the time, but I think in most situations, anything like this, as a business, what you want to be able to do, what you should be able to do, is to rely on government standards and say that, look, we're following government standards as to how we're doing things. And so, if employees are ultimately upset or concerned that maybe you're doing something that risks them, and ultimately as a business, I hate to say it, but we're always concerned as business owners that we might get sued, right? Whether it's by customers or employees or whatever, right? And usually our only protection against that is, are we following community standards? And community standards are generally set by the government. The problem that we have is the communication from the federal down to the state governments has been so piss poor and so disjoint and so obviously and evidently not necessarily science based that that I think as a business owner it's hard to feel that you can safely say, well, I followed a certain course of action because that's what the government said to do, and that's going to fly. I mean, like, I seriously wonder that. I wonder, well, even if the state, and probably not Oregon, because Oregon's much more conservative on this issue, but if I was operating in one of those states where they've been pretty liberal about opening up and doing some pretty radical stuff, if I was operating a business in one of those states, the question that would come to my mind is, even if the state said that it was okay to open up, and I opened up, and that ultimately, that somebody getting sick or injured or hurt could be traced back to my actions, would I really be able to say that I relied on the advice of the state or on the federal government administration? Or is it, or would I be held liable because the courts would say, ha ha ha, how could you possibly rely on those people? Of course, any reasonable person would think that they're just talking nonsense. And so, I mean, it's really turned it on its head. We don't really seem to have an authoritative figure we can actually rely on from a legal liability standpoint. And that's a real problem for business. When government doesn't do its job and act as a reasonable authority on these issues, it creates uncertainty for business. And that's, I think a lot of times people on both sides of the aisle, they think that business wants a particular answer. Yeah, if we get to choose, we want the answer that's going to generate the highest revenue with the least costs, right? But but we live in the real world, and in the real world, I don't necessarily get to choose what my answers are. So the second best thing that I want from government and politics is some certainty, right? Uncertainty is the worst thing for business. And so the answer doesn't matter as much as having some certainty that is well defined. And I think that's a real problem for businesses as we're opening up, that the way this is happening doesn't create a lot of certainty for businesses.
Well, and I think it's also important to kind of note the individualistic nature of the question being asked. Like, when it makes sense to go back to work, it might be one thing for one person and it might be another thing for another person. And, that person is okay to stay at home and willing to deal with the communication issues that can cause, but is, more health anxious about the virus. And so doesn't want to. Yeah, so I think regulation is only good at imposing kind of the floors and the boundaries that we act within, but that ultimately it's such an individual question of when does it make sense to get back to work, that we're always going to see contention on this. And it's never going to be a clear, okay, this is the time. And I think the other thing is that we're going to turn it on and say everybody can go back to work when we think it's safe, but that action in and of itself is going to cause people to continue getting sick. And so that then kind of changes the factors in the risk equation of whether or not it makes sense to go back to work. And so, I think it's an individual decision that each firm and each individual in it has to kind of wrestle with and do their own analysis to determine what makes sense for them. But I don't think we're going to see any kind of consensus on this anytime soon because of the nature of the question,
Completely agree. And I think, as people start going back to work, I think they're going to start asking the same questions. Is it safe? Is it legal to, like from a business owner's perspective, is it legal to tell my employees to come back to work? Or am I, like Ty said, putting myself out for liability on that? So, and I think that's coupled with the fact that like employees probably now want to work from home if it's possible. And not only that though, those that were laid off and now are being called back, and they have the option to sit at home for as much or more money than they were making in a paycheck, that makes it even more difficult to get a workforce up and moving again, with these expanded unemployment benefits. So yeah, it's that governmental swing between being, having the incentive to work, but then also having like clear rules and definitions for what a business is liable for, but also what, the general public can do. And depending on who you ask on what day it is, it's either the county, state, federal, you have no idea. I mean, just before this podcast, we were talking about doing the in-person thing, and we probably did 15 minutes of research to even figure out if that was a viable option, So I can't imagine if we were talking about having people coming back into like an office area and what the liability or what the rules are about that. So, I mean, if we're spending a half hour just looking up if we can do the podcast in person, I can't imagine trying to open up a restaurant, coffee shop, or, even an accounting firm with a brick and mortar presence,
Well, and it's one thing to kind of analyze the question of once government says it's okay to go back to work, is it actually okay? That's one potential question we can ask. But the other question is, should that even be the decision that causes that to become an option? Like we're looking at it as if government says it's okay, then will people want to wait a few more or whatever before they go back to work?